Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, How to Develop a B2B Content Strategy that Generates Results. A few housekeeping items before we get started. We are recording this webinar. After the webinar, I'll be sending out the on-demand link along with some other resources that I'm going to share throughout the webinar. So don't worry about having to do screen grabs or try and capture anything. We'll send all of this to you at the end. Also, if you have any questions as we go through today's webinar, please use the chat feature to send them through. Just post them as they come to mind, and we'll address those at the end of the webinar. I will be hosting today's webinar. For those of you that don't know me, I am Elizabeth Aaron, and I'm the Group Account Director and a partner at Brilliant Metrics. I've been working in marketing for more than 20 years in industries including manufacturing, healthcare, SaaS, hospitality, and tourism. And when I'm not leading our account teams, I spend time with my husband, our two kids, and our lab, Rosie, in our hometown of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. A little bit about Brilliant Metrics. We are a digital-first agency that serves the B2B market. Marketing leaders often come to us when they want to grow their team's capabilities, knowledge, or technology to drive greater results and impact within their organization. Today, we're going to talk about content strategy. Now, I don't want to overcomplicate this with buzzwords and marketing speak, and I'm going to try really hard not to do that during the webinar today. But at its heart, content strategy is a blueprint that reveals who your audience is, what they want, and how to reach them. The idea behind content strategy is simple. Give people something of value in exchange for their information, continue to provide value, and then, and only then, can you ask them to buy. While content marketing is part of most brands' marketing strategy, many marketers underestimate its importance of a carefully planned strategy. And I think that's clear when you take a look at this quote here or stat here. Nearly 80% of B2B businesses engage in content marketing, yet only 43% have documented their strategy. I don't think that any marketer needs to be told about the importance of content. We've all heard content is king. There's a lot of different little ways that that's said about, but the role of a stellar content strategy is something that still needs stressing. It's important because it can help you set and reach your goals. It can help you to track progress. It helps you identify new opportunities. It can help you to cut costs, allowing you to focus on the content that will better help you reach your content goals. And it allows you to optimize your marketing team, helping you to identify what resources you need and where to focus those efforts. And finally, it helps you to produce that content that converts. According to CSO Insights, businesses with a content strategy achieved 27.1% higher win rates and 18.1% higher quota attainment than those without a content strategy. Yet many brands are still struggling to hone their strategies in a way that can govern and guide their content to even greater success. That is because while the idea of content strategy itself is simple, the process can be surprisingly complex. That's because developing a content strategy is not just a way to plan for a few pieces of content ahead of time, but rather it implies establishing content marketing objectives, developing a strategy, and carefully strategizing all of your content ahead of time so that you can generate better results for your business, whether that's improved search engine rankings, more traffic, more social shares, or more leads and conversions. Oops. So in this webinar, I'm going to break down the different components of a content marketing strategy and walk you through the steps of documenting that strategy. That's going to include your mission statement, setting goals, identifying your audience, performing a content audit, developing an editorial calendar, and we will include a template that we use that we'll share with you as well. The actual process of creating the content, distributing the content, and measuring your results. Now, this is supposed to be no more than an hour. So each of these topics on their own could be their own webinar. Today, I'm going to just touch briefly on each of these and give you enough information to at least get this process started of documenting your strategy. And I have a feeling that we'll probably be introducing some of these topics as their own webinar in the future. But in the meantime, if you have any questions, like I said earlier, throw them in the chat. Otherwise, you can reach out to me at the end of the webinar as well. I'll give you my contact information and we can discuss any of these in further detail if you'd like some more information. So let's dive in. We're going to start with your mission statement. The simple act of documenting a mission statement can make a difference. And I'm assuming most, if not all of you, probably have company mission statements, but a content mission statement is going to be a little bit different. So I want to start by playing a little game with you. I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and I want you to think about the questions in the context of your content marketing strategy. Why does your company create content? Who are you creating your content for? What will the content do for them? Now, I know I didn't give you a lot of time to answer that, but hopefully it popped into your head right away, or maybe it didn't. And if it didn't, if you don't know those answers, then those are things that you need to figure out. And you should do that before you create anything else for your blog, your website, your newsletters, or any other platform that you're on. Because if you don't know what someone's going to gain from consuming your content, then the audience is not going to see a compelling reason to engage with it either. Fortunately, there's a straightforward way to frame all of these answers so that everyone involved in your content process, your planners, your producers, the people that you're targeting your content at, will all know why your content is valuable. And the key is to write a content mission statement. A strong content mission statement reflects your business's values and helps you distinguish your storytelling from other content competing for your audience's attention. And think about how you consume content. You know there's a lot of competition out there. In the most basic sense, a content statement answers the questions of why you're creating your content, who you're targeting, and how you will help them in a way that no one else can. You should use your content mission statement for every piece of content, and it should be the first thing you create as part of your content strategy. While content mission statements come in all shapes and sizes, the most effective statements are going to answer these 3 questions. Who is your target audience? What are you offering? And more importantly, what are you qualified to give your audience? And we're going to talk more about that in a little bit. Why should your customers care? What's the grander purpose? What can they do because of your content? You don't want to focus on your own products or benefits or features in your mission statement. You need to make it about the end user and the value that you can provide them. Because if you provide value, they're going to seek you out. You'll become a thought leader, you'll earn their trust, and that eventually will turn into a sale. So to make it easy, we have provided a very simple content mission statement. If this feels too simple, you can go online and Google content mission statement, and a whole slew of templates will pop up. But I think that this one's pretty straightforward because it really gets to the heart of what it is you're trying to document, who your audience is, what information you're providing them, and the benefit that that offers. So let's look at this in practical application for a minute. So here I have 2 examples. The first one is for a digital marketing agency that specializes in Google Analytics. And so their content mission statement is, our content is where marketers, their target audience, get the most out of Google Analytics so they can identify opportunities and demonstrate their department's impact. The second one is for a food service manufacturer. Our blog helps food service operators get advice and strategies to make managing day-to-day food service operations easier. Straightforward, tells you who you're targeting, the information you're providing, and the benefit they're going to get out of it. Now, one of the things that will make this not effective in any way, shape, or form is if you draft it, put it in a drawer, and never use it again. So we want to make sure that this is something that we have out so that people can see. At the end of the day, this is the promise that we're making to our audience. So we don't want to keep it a secret. We want to share this with both our target audience and our internal teams. Within our target audience, we want to take the what's in it for them portion of our mission statement, and we want to post that to the top of the blog. We may even want to use that as the page header because it very quickly and concisely tells them exactly what's in it for them. Another great place to use your mission statement is in your email sign-up calls to action. Every email sign-up box will work harder if you turn your mission statement into a descriptive call to action. And a third place you can use it is in your social media bios. Your social media bios are a great way to give people a reason to add you to their social streams. By using your mission statement, you're telling them very clearly and very concisely exactly what they will get if they follow you. But it's not just the target audience we want to make sure is seeing this. The internal team needs to be exposed to the content mission statement as well. And to do that, it needs to be visible. Because when you're talking about content creation, The mission statement not only creates a shared purpose for the team, but it establishes consistency and can kindle creativity and enthusiasm. So the first thing you want to make sure you do is you publish it everywhere. Make posters, make screensavers, make custom mouse pads, make it something that your content team is going to see all of the time. You're going to want to add it to your style guide and share it with not only your internal team, but any contractors that you're working with. And you want to make sure you incorporate it into your review process. For every single piece of content that you write, you want to ask yourself, does this content deliver on my content mission statement? If the answer is no, then it's not something you should be publishing. So we talked mission, let's talk about setting goals. So each piece of content needs to fulfill your mission statement, but it also needs to have work towards contributing your overall marketing goals. Because again, if it's not, why are you producing it? So tips for goal setting are pretty straightforward. I have them summarized over here. You've all heard of SMART: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. It's easy to set some more generic goals when we're talking about content production, like generate more leads. But if we try to convert that into a SMART goal, we can say something like publish a Q1 ebook that brings in 1,000 leads. We're addressing the measurement, we're addressing the time-based, we're making it very specific and easy to understand. Instead of a goal of creating multimedia content, we may want to clarify that we're creating 1 video per month. And SEO, that's usually a big goal of everyone when they're talking about content marketing. Instead of saying that you want to improve SEO, let's make it very measurable and time-based by specifying that we're going to improve page rankings for 5 high-value keywords by October. In doing so, again, you help to align your team and you give them something to work towards, and you also have something to show that you accomplished when you get to the end of that period. You want to make sure you balance your short-term and your long-term goals. And finally, you want to make sure that you're distinguishing between your production goals and your performance goals. Your production goals are really going to look at your process and your efficiency, and they're really great for keeping your internal team motivated and on track. Your performance goals are going to be those items that are going to align more with your business objectives, like generating more leads. So today I want to challenge you to think about your goals differently. We talked about making sure that they're SMART and making sure that we have the short term and the long term and the difference between production and performance goals. But I also want you to think about how you've set your goals up in the past. What have they been? Goals like creating brand awareness. That's something that I hear commonly when we're working with clients. But rather than that being the only goal, it needs to be a step in the path towards a more profitable action, something that the executive team or C-suite is going to find value in. So on this slide, I've outlined some common content goals and then the profitable actions that they tie to. These are the actions that your leadership team is going to be interested in. These are the actions that are going to tie back to those overall business objectives and help make the case of how your content marketing is contributing and why you need more resources in the future. If you can make these connections, if you can communicate these connections, then you should have no problem showing how content marketing contributed to the bottom line. And again, that's going to help make the case if you need more resources in the future. So when everyone's on the same page when it comes to content marketing and what it's actually supposed to achieve, your company can see some pretty significant benefits. The first one that we've seen when there's been alignment around content goals has been smoother collaboration. If everyone is in agreement on the objective of the content, then it's a lot easier to collaborate on it. It's easier to get ideas. It's easier to get those ideas approved, to get people to contribute to them, and to get that content published. We see that you often have more accurate KPI tracking. When you know your goals, then you can align on the specific KPIs that support those individual goals. And that allows you to hone in on what's most important rather than sort of looking at everything and getting lost in the data. We find that there's faster content production. Going back to goal alignment, if you're aligned on the goals, then there's less disagreement about what content you should be writing and those different approval stages. And so you can move that content through production a lot faster. You see a higher ROI. If you're aligned and focused, it makes it easier to allocate that budget where you're going to have the biggest impact. And then it's easier to get more resources. If you're able to prove that ROI and the executive team sees the value in the content that you've produced, it's going to be a lot easier to get resources to produce more content in the future. All right, let's talk about audience. Audience is a hard one because a lot of times I think in clients that we've worked with, they know who their audience is. They know who they want to reach, but there's a difference between knowing who you want to reach and actually knowing your audience. So I think this is a great quote to share. Content that understands the audience will be good content. Content that doesn't can't be. You cannot produce good content until you know your audience. And so many brands fall into the trap of creating content that they want to create, not the content that the audience is interested in. So they end up spending their resources creating content that doesn't meet the needs of the audience because it's not meeting the needs of the audience. They're not seeing newsletter subscribers. They're not seeing engagements. They're not seeing conversions. And so they start to think that content marketing doesn't work. But in reality, it's just that they aren't creating the right content. If we can understand our target audience, then we can formulate a digital content marketing strategy that has a greater chance of success because we know that we're developing it to meet the needs of our audience. At Brilliant Metrics, this all begins with persona development. Now, persona development can be a webinar on its own. In fact, it is. We have one called Getting Started with Buyer Personas, and I'll include that link in the follow-up email along with the link to today's on-demand webinar. But by focusing on your personas and adopting an audience-first content marketing strategy, you allow your business to effectively get the right message to the right audience. And again, it's a whole webinar, but just some high-level tips that I like to share when talking about persona development. You want to keep in mind that these are not fictional guesses at what a target user thinks. This is backed by research. You want to make sure that you're talking to your frontline team members, you're talking to your sales team, you're looking at your analytics, you're doing secondary research to try and develop a persona, a background that is as close to reality as you can get. Every aspect of a persona's description needs to be tied back to that real data, whether it's observed or researched. You need to make sure you're segmenting your audience. And this is where a lot of people can struggle. The key is getting the right level. Just like you can't have one persona representing your entire audience, you don't want to niche it so far down that you've got 15 or 20 or 30 personas because you're going to have a hard time delivering on that. You really need to find that sweet spot. You want to make sure you understand their background, their goals, their motivations, and pain points, because this is how you're going to personalize that content and make sure that it's meeting their exact needs. And finally, you want to understand how and where your target audience is getting their information. This is really important and often overlooked. It's important because it allows you to understand what channels your target audience will be on, who they're going to for advice, and then you can tailor the content to fit that, either in your distribution strategy and how you promote that content, or in even how you develop that content, the message, the layout. The content that you produce for LinkedIn is going to be very different than any content that you're producing for Instagram. So understanding what channels they're on is very important. But knowing your audience isn't always enough. These days, people want to learn before they buy. They want to be educated instead of pitched. The internet not only makes this possible, but it makes it really easy to self-educate and form an opinion before you ever reach out to the sales team. So the question becomes, how do you get your content in front of your target audience in those really early stages? And how do we anticipate the questions they're asking so when they go in and they do a Google search, that our content not only answers that question, but is written in a way and optimized in a way that it shows up in their search results? And the answer is a buyer's journey. So understanding the buyer's journey, because consumers are more informed and more empowered than ever, it's important to not only understand the personas, but to also understand the journey so that we can create content that helps them along the path and positions you as an authority in your space. And to do that, you have to document the buyer's journey. Not just how they think, but the answers that they're asking, the path they're taking to find that solution. By understanding the buyer's journey, you can begin to create content at each of those stages. Now, I can't go through this today. Again, buyer's journey, that's an entire webinar on its own, but I wanted to include this as a reference that you could access or you could review as you are working through to develop your own plan. Because as you document the buyer's journey, and if you can capture what they're thinking and who they're turning to advice and the types of questions they're asking, then you're going to find that those content ideas and those methods of distribution are just naturally going to become very clear. And with that clarity, you can create a truly effective content marketing strategy. So in this reference table, you'll see we have the different journey states: see, think, and do. And we have outlined what the audience is thinking, the type of content they're looking for, and what the media needs to do, the role that media plays, or the role that promotion plays in getting the message out here. And so this will be helpful as you start to draft that plan. All right, so we know who the audience is, we know what their wants are, their needs, their questions. Now it's time to produce content. Or is it? Because most marketers have at least some level of content marketing. I'm assuming I actually know quite a few of you on the call, and I know that you're not starting from scratch. And so the next step in developing your content strategy is actually performing a content audit. So a content audit analyzes the focus and performance of your content to find opportunities. Most of us are so focused on publishing new content that we often neglect the content that we've produced in the past. And this can hurt us in a couple of different ways. One, content isn't always the home run we'd like it to be. I wish it was, but sometimes we get it wrong. And the engagement rate is lower than we expected, or the piece doesn't drive conversions, or it just completely fails to rank on Google. Or maybe the piece was produced so long ago that it isn't relevant. Maybe something's changed in the industry, changed in your product or service, or maybe your strategy changed. All of this can impact the effectiveness of your content. And the third thing to keep in mind is Google. Google changes the algorithm not all the time, but at a regular enough basis that can impact your content performance too. You want to make sure that the metadata in your blog is optimized and consistent across all posts. You may be optimizing for keywords now, but were you doing that 5 years ago when you created content? Going back and taking a look at those blog posts and seeing where you have opportunities for improvement is going to be key as you move forward. So to understand the true state of your content, to identify the content that's not performing as well as it could be, and how you need to fix it, or where you may have gaps in your current content coverage, you need to run an audit. So the first step in running a content audit is to create or perform a content inventory. And if you don't already have one, what that is that's going to just be a complete list of all of the content you've produced, every piece of content you currently have. And in a little bit, I will share a template that we use for this and some best practices and tips for using it. Once you've gathered your content, you want to write down your mission and your goals. So that mission statement we drafted at the beginning of this process and the goals that we aligned on in that next step, you want both of these nearby as you review the content. And you want to check each piece of content to see if it fulfills on your mission statement and what goal the content supports. Because again, if it's not fulfilling on your mission statement and it's not supporting one of your content goals, is there an opportunity there to revise the content so that it does? Or was it written at a time where you had a different focus and maybe that's not relevant content anymore? Then you want to go through, once you have that whole list together, you know your goals and your mission statement, you want to go through and you want to categorize your content. And this is where it's going to vary based on your individual needs. You're going to want to decide how you want to bucket your content. And the categories are going to vary based on your strategy. But some common categories that get used is, bucketing by target audience, journey state. What type of content is it? Is it a blog post, a guide, a white paper, a case study? What pain point is it addressing, or what motivation is it addressing? And what's the topic of the content? This is where the bulk of your time is going to be spent in this process. You're going to review each piece of content and you're going to fill in the missing information in your audit spreadsheet. Once you have all of that gathered together, then you're going to analyze your data. That's where you're going to review all of your content and you're going to look critically at the information that you've gathered. And from there, you're going to create action items. And this is going to be the final step in your audit. You're going to think about all of the content you have. What posts need to be deleted? What's just not relevant anymore? Do you have posts out there about a product that you don't even carry? What content needs to be updated, either from a content perspective, maybe the call to action isn't strong enough. Maybe there are some cross-linking opportunities. You've developed new content and you could cross-link to a case study that would be a perfect fit within there. You may need to find that you need to rewrite it. It may be that your content resources were limited 3 or 4 years ago, and so your blog posts were in the 400 to 600 word range. But now you've got more resources and you want to expand those out. And so taking a look and saying, is this content I can expand? Is this content I can rewrite? Or does it just need to be restructured? Is there a way that this could be rewritten? Would it be better as a listicle? Or would it be better if we were to, not even better, but can we repurpose this? We wrote this guide. How else can we use this content? So all of this is going to come up during your content audit, and you're going to actually create action items of what your next step is going to be. This content audit should be done regularly. At a minimum, you want to do it once a year or anytime you have a pivot in your strategy. You've added an audience, you've taken an audience away. However, based on your organization and your content production levels, how much content you're producing, you may want to increase the frequency. If you have a fairly limited audience, you're producing 1 or 2 blog posts a month, you may not need to do an audit as frequently as someone who's producing 15 or 20 or 30 blog posts a month, where you want to make sure that you're staying on top of that. And again, really identifying those cross-linking opportunities. So I mentioned that you want to go in and categorize your content, and then and audit that content. Some of the questions that you're going to want to ask when you're auditing that content, some things to keep in mind to find out if it is content that needs to that you're going to want to take an action item on is this content relevant to the target audience? If you go in and you say every piece of content, you say who that content is targeting, and you know that you've got goals that are tied to 2 of your 3 audiences, understanding if that content is relevant to those audiences, that's going to be important. Does the content support the buyer's journey? What keywords does this content rank for? What's the average position of those keywords? Is there room for that to be improved? Can the content be repurposed? Like we talked about, you made a guide, 10 or a 15-page guide. Is there something that you can pull out of there that can be turned into an infographic for a subset of that audience, or for some social content? And does this content fulfill on the content goals? Again, getting back to the idea that if it doesn't, why are you producing it? This is not an inclusive list, and the questions you ask are going to vary based on your goals. Sorry about that. All right, let's talk about the editorial calendar. This is going to be another component of your content strategy. So an editorial calendar, which is borrowed from the traditional publishing world, is an actual calendar outlining both high-level and thematic frameworks that you are going to be producing throughout the year to achieve your content goals. An organized content strategy makes use of calendars to both plan and create the content, but are all calendars created equal? And I'm sure some of you have heard, you've heard the phrase editorial calendar, and you've heard the phrase content calendar. So what's the difference? The terms are often used interchangeably, but they're actually very different. The editorial calendar provides that big picture view of your overall content strategy and typically provides yearly or quarterly or maybe even monthly views of the content that's being planned and how it fits into your overall strategy. The content calendar is a written schedule of when and where you plan to publish your upcoming content. It's going to be detailing the day-to-day or weekly content creation process and provide specific details on who's writing it, when the draft is due, when it'll be published, where it'll be promoted, all of those tactical execution type details. Both of those calendars help teams through every step of the content creation and marketing process, where the editorial calendar is going to give managers and strategists a very clear idea of the content they need to create. The content calendar is going to outline the specific due dates for each of those pieces of content. Content calendars can often be broken down to be even more specific to the team using them. So for example, you may have a social media calendar that could focus on what days you're publishing the specific social media content on what platforms, where a marketing calendar may list out the necessary tasks of your content marketing strategy, like your email marketing campaigns or paid promotion. And so the level that you're, the different calendars you're using and that level of detail is really going to depend on your team. There's a lot of different content calendar planning tools out there to help manage the workflow. At the end of the day, it's all about finding something that works for you, your team, and your organization. So I promised that we would share a template, and I will. Right now I have screenshots of it, but when I send the email following up on this, we will actually include the Google Sheet template for you. Um, and the template is sort of a hybrid. It's what we use here at Brilliant Metrics. We've developed our own editorial calendar template that incorporates some aspects of a content calendar as well. And we found that this works. The content services we provide our clients vary. In some cases, we manage the entire content development process, from ideation to content development to publishing and promotion. In other cases, our clients manage the content creation process, and we manage distributing the content, a topic that we're going to talk about in just a minute. We have found that the template that we're going to share with you is fairly easy to use and keeps everyone on the same page from a high-level strategy, as well as content expectations. I like this template for a couple of reasons. One, it's in Google Sheets, so it's really easy to share and it's really easy to modify. So when we send this over, feel free to customize it so that it works for your team. Since it is in Google Sheets, it can track changes over time. I cannot tell you how often we've had to go look at a historical version because we've done something a little funny. So that's a nice little fail-safe that's included in there. It's really easy to customize based on the goals and resources of the team. It provides a real-time content inventory. You remember when we were talking about the audit, the first thing you want to do is do a content inventory. That is probably, if you don't already have one, gathering all of that and knowing what you have available to you is a very time-consuming task. This template allows you to keep track of that over time, and it can easily be modified to run a content audit when you need it, all within the same document, so that you're not having to copy and paste and have information living in multiple places. So today I'll share the general template with you. However, as I said before, you can customize this to your unique needs, and I'll send you a link to the template in the follow-up email. So the editorial calendar consists of 3 tabs. We have the first tab, which you're seeing a screen grab of here, which is just sort of an instructions tab. The second tab is the actual editorial calendar. I'm going to jump ahead and I'll come back. Then we have a content ideas, and I don't have it in here, but there's a key. And the key just helps some of these drop-down menus that we have built into the template. This is the screenshot of the editorial calendar tab. It houses all of the content that has either been produced or is in production. And this is showing a status of all published. This is just a small snippet of this calendar, but there's statuses here where you can have proposed, in progress. You can keep track of the status in this column. It's going to track both the original and recycled content for each of your audiences. And it also provides some information here in blue for promoting the content, either through your paid media or email or social channels. And it gives you a chance to track your objectives and KPIs. So all of this information is contained in one place. So it becomes very easy to know that this blog post of how to increase your content marketing ROI, who it's targeting, and what it is that we're trying to accomplish with this specific piece of content. My tip here, I found that if you track this information while you create the content, it makes it a lot easier to stay on top of it. Again, if you have to go back later and find all of your pieces of content, you don't realize what else you may have out there that is either outdated or you could use for something else. So using this as your ongoing content inventory is a really great way to see what you've got in your arsenal. The next tab takes a look at content ideas. This is really a place to capture any content ideas that you may have. So future content ideas can be outlined here. The status column helps to keep track of what ideas have been proposed or rejected or moved to the editorial calendar. And the template is structured in a way that you can actually take column B through I. If you decide that's an idea you want to move over, copy it and paste it directly into your editorial calendar, so you're not re-entering data. All right. So now let's talk about actually creating the content. This is what the whole strategy is about. The development of consistent and high quality content is one of the most effective methods of establishing your brand as someone your target audience can know, like, and trust. Because at the end of the day, your company has this, customers look or clients look at your company as a person. It's not an actual person, but it has a personality. And your content is a really great way to help establish and reinforce that. Not only does it give you a chance to engage with your audience, but content can help to drive sales. But it has to be good content, unique content that, like we said, adds value that they're not going to find anywhere else. And so content development in general has a lot of different facets. I'm not going to be able to dive into all of them here, but what I would like to share with you is two of the most common mistakes that we see brands making over and over again in the content creation process. Mistake number one is failing to focus on the prospect's needs. Instead of asking how they can add to your bottom line, you want to ask how you can add value to your prospect or customer's life. People don't want product descriptions. They want to be educated. They want to be entertained. They want to be transported out of their lives. And so you need to be developing content that is going to do that, that's focused on them, not focused on you. Contently did a content preference services. It's a little bit dated. It's from 2019, but I think that it does a good job of really summarizing what people are looking for. People want content, first and foremost, that educates. Secondly, that entertains. Third, that inspires. And fourth, at the very bottom, they want someone to explain a product or a service to them. In a lot of the brands that we work with, it's really easy to talk about your products. I mean, that's what you know, and that's what you're trying to promote. But if you just focus on that, you're really missing out on that opportunity to build a relationship with your customer base. The second mistake that we see people making is creating content that doesn't add value. As you develop new content, you want to be asking yourself, how can I add value to my prospects and customers' lives? And so here's sort of 3 questions to keep in mind as you're working through that content development. The first one is, am I answering a question my customer has during the buying process? Remember how we talked about they do a lot of research on their own? By identifying the questions they're asking during the buying process before they've even reached out to you, you're going to increase the chances of getting into their newsfeed, of getting your content in front of them, because you're answering a question that they're already asking. You want to focus on the questions that they're asking, not what you want them to ask, but on what they are actually asking. And that's why it is so helpful to document that buyer's journey as part of your content strategy, so you really understand what those questions are. The next question is this a question that only my target audience would ask? This is important, and this is where sometimes content strategy gets a little skewed. When we start looking at metrics and how many website sessions, how many website visitors you've had, I can write a piece of content that's going to pull a whole bunch of people to my website. But if they're not my target audience, then what's the benefit? What's the point? We want to focus on driving not sessions, but driving the right sessions. So ranking for highly relevant searches, even if they're really low volume, is going to be better for your business than ranking for broad terms. And when you're in the B2B space, this is where it's very different than the B2C. In B2B, some of those keywords, especially those long tail keywords, they're not necessarily going to show up in the search forecasts. If you're using a tool like Ahrefs, it's going to say, 0 to 10 searches, or it's going to say no searches. That doesn't mean that's not a keyword you want to target. You know that there's not a lot of searches there, but at the same time, at the end of the day, you know that those are highly relevant. That is your exact target audience that you want. And so sometimes it's not about looking at the quantity of the website sessions you're driving, but the quality of the website sessions that you're driving. And then finally, you want to ask, is this a question that I can answer better than they can? If you can't answer it better than they can, if you've not earned their trust by proving you can answer it better than they can, then why are they going to read your content? If they're not getting value out of it, they're not going to come read your content. And they might read that first post. But again, if you're not delivering that content, are they going to come back and visit you again? It's not very likely. So there's a lot of content out there. In fact, there are more than 4 million blog posts published every single day. To get through that clutter, you have to provide value either in the form of knowledge, utility, or entertainment, or you're not going to get the click. So when you're looking at it, at that content development and looking at your content ideas, ask yourself, is this a question I can answer better than they can? If you can educate them, then you're going to get the click. And be honest with yourself. There's not a lot of places where you can answer yes to all 3 of these points. But when you find it, when you find that intersection of all 3 points, you are creating truly great content that is going to improve your content program and going to drive results. And that's a sweet spot we're attaining to. All right, you have produced the content. Now let's talk distribution. The idea that, write it and they will come is not necessarily true. Remember what I just said about the 4.4 million blogs that are produced every day? There's a lot of competition out there. Creating it and hoping that they're just going to stumble upon you on their own is not necessarily the best path for moving forward. At a minimum, you do need to incorporate SEO best practices. But you also need to promote the post, and that needs to be part of your overall content strategy. So I think this is a really great quote. People don't find content by mistake or by accident. Every content plan needs a complementary promotion plan that combines paid, owned, and earned media. So let's talk about that. So if you haven't heard of this before, this is the PESO model: paid, earned, shared, and owned. And it serves as a means of segmenting all of the marketing channels that are at your disposal into these discrete groups. This particular graphic is created by a woman by the name of Jenny Dietrich, who wrote a book on the topic. And it outlines examples of each of the channels and where they intersect. So paid, this orange one here, is exchanging money for distribution. So it could be ad, it could be content. You've got your Facebook posts, you've got sponsored tweets, you've got some lead generation, your display ads. All of that falls into the paid category. Earned is trading content for an established authorities audience. So here you've got your publicity piece, your media relations, bloggers, investors, influencers. They all fall within earned media. Shared is going to be amplifying your content through your own audience. And this happens in a few different places, primarily through social media. And there's quite a few different places here. And then owned is any of your owned properties. And so this is going to be through your website, videos that you've created, any user-generated content, that sort of thing. And then you'll see here, you've got where they sort of intersect with each other. So there's a lot of different options here for distributing your media. This is actually, again, an entire webinar on its own, and another one that we will definitely be adding to the list. I do have a really great blog post that our founder, Steve Robinson, wrote that I will share with you in my follow-up email. And not only does it outline this and include some background on each of it, but it also talks about the benefits and the pitfalls of each channel, which I think is important as you start to evaluate, because marketers are never short on ideas. That's not a problem. We have a ton of ideas. The problem is we don't usually have the resources to be able to do everything that we want. And so one of the things you're going to want to do is take a look at each of these channels as you develop your strategy and figure out where it makes the most sense for your resources, for your target audience, and read the blog post that I'll share, because one of the things it talks about is how you can, there's pros and cons of each, but if you use a combination of all 4 channels or 3 of the channels, you can start to compensate for some of the weaknesses that are in one area with strengths of another, so that you have a very robust omni-channel program. A couple of quick tips for distributing content. Dues, email programs. Nothing is more direct than email. Your subscriber base has literally given you permission to email them. There's no algorithm that you have to figure out that's going to skew the results. So if you don't have an email program in place, you definitely want to get one, like, as soon as humanly possible. Email is important. You want to make sure you're building on your own owned properties. You can't exclusively focus on email and inbound. You're going to want to incorporate paid channels as well, because they offer a really great way to expand your reach into new audiences. But you want to make sure that you're also developing your owned properties. You want to make sure you're tailoring the copy to the target audience. Using the same copy for everyone on every channel is the fastest way to turn them off. If you try to use an Instagram post on LinkedIn or vice versa, you're not meeting the expectations of the user's experience on those platforms. And even if your message is really great, if it's not in line with what they're looking for, they're going to ignore you. And you want to look for opportunities to repurpose your content. This is, I think, one of the big opportunities that I see across all of our clients. They spend a lot of time developing a piece of content, and then they kind of forget about it. I mean, it sits there, it's doing its SEO job, but there's other ways you can use it. A guide can be broken out into graphics for organic social posts, or maybe its own standalone infographic. A series of blog posts on a similar topic can then be converted into a guide. Repurposing your content gives it much better reach and visibility, and you're not redesigning every single time. A couple of don'ts. You don't want to pick channels and assume that they're always going to work. Audience changes, algorithms change. You want to make sure that you're checking in on your channels and experimenting with them regularly to make sure that they still make sense for you, your audience, and your objectives. On the same note, you don't want to just focus on one channel. As you think about how to reach your audience, you want to look at that omni-channel approach as creating a holistic experience so that you can reach your audience in all of those little moments. Now, you can't be on every channel all of the time, so you want to use your audience research to really figure out where your audience is spending their time and getting their information, and then prioritize that so you can get the most bang for your buck. You don't want to post at random intervals. You created this amazing content strategy. You want to be consistent and you want to work that plan. And then finally, you want to use the same content. You don't want to use the same content on every channel. People have different expectations. I talked about this just a second ago, but failing to meet that intended experience on those individual channels will keep them from clicking on your content. All right. And finally, measuring your results. How to measure your content marketing results is, again, a whole other webinar topic on its own, and it's one that I hope to add in the future. But in the meantime, there's two things that you have to have in place to be successful. The first one is keeping in mind the difference in organic traffic and paid traffic when you're analyzing content performance. The content that you develop to drive organic traffic is going to perform very differently than content developed for a paid media promotion. And so you want to make sure you have the right metrics in place to measure them. And you want to keep that in mind when you're evaluating the success of your content. Something that performed well in paid media may not have search volume. It may not be something that someone's searching for organically. It doesn't mean that it's a bad post. It's still played its role in your paid media strategy. It just may not play a role in your organic strategy, and that's okay. The other thing you want to take a look at is setting up goals in Google Analytics to track your content performance. You want to make sure that the goals we established in section 2 are documented and tracked. You want to set those goals up in Google Analytics. You want to track your content performance, and then you want to communicate it. And technically, I guess this should be success factor number 3, but too often we have metrics in place and we produce reports that we share with our internal team, but they're not necessarily getting the visibility that they should be getting. So we want to make sure that we're communicating our goals and KPIs and sharing it not only with our team, but also beyond. Who else would be interested in this story? Who else needs to know what it is that we're doing? We want to brag about our success and our key learnings. So as you develop your content strategy, you want to make sure you take into account each of these items we talked about. The content mission statement, you want to set your goals, make sure you know who your audience is and you know what they're interested in. You want to perform your content audit and develop an editorial calendar. You want to create that content, you want to distribute that content, and then you need to measure the content. And my final thought, my last takeaway for you is not to forget that sometimes the essence of strategy is choosing what not to do. Like I said, we are not at a loss for ideas. The big challenge here is making sure that we're focusing those ideas on the things that are going to make the biggest impact on our business. And that is our webinar. So I want to thank you for your time today. As I mentioned, I'll be sending an email follow-up with the slide deck, a link to the recording, and a few of the different resources that I mentioned during the webinar. So with that, Steve, I know that there was a few questions coming in through chat. Anything that we can tackle?
Absolutely. I think we've got some great questions here. Robin wants to know, if you introduce a new audience or a new persona, how do you get to know them and understand their content needs?
Yep, that's a great question. So introducing a new audience, in a perfect world where resources aren't an issue, we would be doing persona research and we would be discovering and documenting the buyer's journey. Sometimes that's not always the case. Sometimes we have to pivot quickly. I know, Robin, you speak from experience here. So, in that case, we want to look for those similarities. And until we can get that persona and that buyer's journey documented, experimentation becomes our best friend. Don't just assume we know. Let's put, an A/B test out there and see how they're responding. And then we can start using that information to better understand that audience.
Thank you. Scott wants to know, what do you say when he said client, but I think this applies broadly to anytime you have a stakeholder, right? Could be executive, could be someone in sales or someone else within the organization that really wants you to put a sales pitch into a blog, either making the whole blog a sales pitch or putting a CTA at the bottom saying, click here to buy from us.
Oh gosh, so that's it's a great question. I've never experienced that. I think the opportunity to involve the sales team and key stakeholders in the buyer's journey development from the beginning is your best effort at trying to combat that. That's not always an option though. And so having that documented buyer's journey, being able to share that with them, and then explaining what that path looks like. Sometimes if you've got some other marketing capabilities built in, if you've got lead scoring, if you've got some other reports that you're able to show sort of that funnel or that flow analysis, that can be helpful. But also just trying to show that path forward as they progress through the different content.
Excellent. Gabriella was wondering if you had any resources for ideating. Thank you, Gabriella, for making me say that word. Creating new ideas for content.
Oh my gosh, yes, so many. So, I'm a big fan. Internally, we use Ahrefs. I know there's a couple others. Steve, what are some alternatives to Ahrefs?
SEMrush or SEMrush is another tool, and then even just Google your own search console and seeing what people are searching for that maybe you don't have a good piece to rank for, but you've got something close enough that it shows up in there.
So Google Search Console and Ahrefs are my two go-tos. I'll typically try to find a keyword in there. And then honestly, I Google it. I Google it and I see the other content that's up there. Google has those really nice, like people are also asking questions. And so that becomes great ideas. And it's not that I'm looking to see what other people are doing so I can copy them. I'm looking to see at how people are approaching the topic and what they're not saying. And is there a different angle that I could take so that I'm still, covering that search term? I'm still meeting those search results, but I'm taking the angle that no one else is taking.
I would add Reddit and Quora as really great gold mines of topics for blogs as well, especially if a whole bunch of people are piling on to say, yeah, I need to know that answer to that question too, and nobody's providing a good answer.
Definitely.
Okay, one question that I had is, once you have a bunch of ideas, how do you prioritize them? How do you decide what to produce now?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm going to have you go back and take a look at your goals, what it is that you're trying to accomplish. In a perfect world, we would just have one goal and it would make it really easy, but I've yet to meet a brand that seems to be the case. So take a look at your goals, take a look at your current content production, and take a look at your buyer's journey. What we're trying to make sure is that we've got good coverage across all three. If you have a goal of driving website sessions and increasing revenue, do you have content that is fulfilling on both of those, or is one of them falling short? Then take a look at your editorial calendar, specifically by your journey states, and see where you have an opportunity. Another way to look at it is from product or topic coverage. Is there a pain point that your audience has that you're not addressing? That would be, if you're choosing between two different pieces, you may be wanting to fill in that gap. And I thought I had a third point, but it totally fell out of my brain.
Okay.
So it's going to have to be two this time.
Scott also asked, how do you objectively assess the channels that your audience are on? So how do you decide what channels you should be distributing content on or referring to get most effectively deliver that content?
Yeah. So if you're able to, I would say experimentation. Test different channels against each other, run your content, not necessarily the same content. You want it to be related, but again, if you're not presenting your content in the way that prospect would expect to see on that channel. You're going to see some decreased returns there, but take a look at your engagement rate. Take a look at your soft conversions when they get to the site. Are they viewing additional pages? Are they signing up for your newsletter? Are they filling out forms? What's the quality of that traffic? And at the end of the day, use your cost metrics to help determine it. We are constantly evaluating LinkedIn. LinkedIn drives really great traffic, but the cost of that LinkedIn traffic, sometimes we have to step back and say, does this really make sense for our overall goals, or is this money better allocated somewhere else? So taking a look at those cost metrics can really help you to determine the right channels to be on.
Excellent. I think we have time for one more question. If I don't see one coming in, I've got a good one for you. How do you find the sweet spot of, like, your audience is going to be at different technical levels and different levels of expertise, right? If you're constantly talking to them like with all the jargon and super technically, you're going to alienate those folks that are less educated, still might be influential. But if you speak overly technical, you alienate the people you understand when you're going to alienate one audience. How do you pick? How do you find that right sweet spot?
That's a really good question. And we actually are experiencing this with one of our clients that's in a more technical space. So the way that we've approached it with them is we've taken the content. Both parties are at the end of the day asking the same question, but one is at a very technical level and the other one isn't. The answer they're trying to get to is the same. And so we use a combination of both see and think content. So we position the see in those more generic terms. We identify that problem. We talk about the problem in those terms and then lead the path to that piece of content, that think state content that's going to be more technical. In doing so, we don't alienate either one of them, and we help to educate them as they move along their journey and try and find, again, through that independent research, the answer to their problem.
Excellent. I think that's all we have for questions.
Well, thank you for your time today. I appreciate that you gave me an entire hour out of, I'm sure, your very busy schedules. Like I said, I will be sending over links to the resources and the on-demand, but if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. My email address is on there on the screen now, and you can always reach out via LinkedIn as well. There's not a lot of Elizabeth Aarons out there, so I'm pretty easy to find.